Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT, every day of the week, where we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and the airdrop season bonanza, which is taking place. Key question today: are we rich? We're not sure yet. There's been a little bit of confusion as to whether we are or not. We're going to get into that in just a little bit, and all kinds of other aspects of the market too. But just a reminder before we get there, I'm your host, BJ. I'm joined by my legendary co-host, Legendary, and Sammy is on stage with us too on X and live on YouTube. And just a reminder, friends, nothing that we say here is financial advice. We do not know anything for sure, so please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, Legendary, how are you feeling this Wednesday, the 14th of February, which I believe is Valentine's Day?
Indeed, it is GMGM. I'm thinking about a philosophical question on Valentine's Day.
Okay.
When do you transition from being pre-rich to actually being rich? Especially if the market keeps pumping like that.
Good question. I don't know why it's made me think this, but NFT Stat Sam asked a poll yesterday, put a poll out there yesterday, and he said, like, what do you do with your portfolios? Are you tracking it? Like, is it in a Google Docs? Is it in a, like, are you keeping some kind of mental model? Do you not track it at all? And the honest answer for me, at least in part, is I don't know. Like, I don't know when, like, I don't track it fully, which means that I'll never know when I am rich, because I'll always be in this constant feeling of like, well, it's going to keep going up. Is that a fair answer? I don't know. That's my initial thinking. What's your thinking, Legendary?
So it's a bit like Schrodinger's cat of being rich. You might already be rich because something that you have, but you're not aware of, has pumped significantly. And by the time you realize it, 3 months down the line, it's already down 99%. But in theory, you actually were rich for like 2.5 months.
Yes, it's exactly that. It's very much that. But also from some perspective, I'm going to come to Sammy on this. On some level, it's just like I just look. Maybe this is crazy. Maybe this is bull market talk, but I don't know when you're supposed to sell like Bitcoin and ETH. Isn't the whole point that you're just not supposed to sell it? Like, I'm getting in that kind of mood where it's like, well, what are you going to sell it for? You're gonna have to do something else with it, aren't you? That's where I'm leaning towards, at least for the very core assets. But would love to hear Sammy's thoughts. Sammy, good morning, my friend. What are your thoughts on this? How are you doing? How are you feeling? What are your thoughts?
I'm good. It's an interesting question around like what is pre-rich? Is it you've got a load of points that you're going to convert to tokens, or do you hold assets that you eventually decide to sell? I think the obvious choice is to DCA out, like sell on the way up. And if you can think that you can outperform Bitcoin, ETH with this airdrop farming, then it's probably a good way to go. But that's difficult. Whenever I try and sell and buy back in, I always do it wrong. I sell the top, buy the bottom. So I think just holding and selling on the way up is probably the way.
Very sensible ideas there. I'm going to go to Funky in a second while I share something which I wrote to some people in a private chat yesterday. Maybe very much deluded. Remember, this is not financial advice, so it's actually leaning more towards entertainment sometimes. Funky, your hand is raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. What are your thoughts on this question of pre-rich versus being actual rich versus actually just making sure you're on track of where your portfolio is at?
GM everyone, I'm already rich personally because I have the love of my life, and so I feel rich in that regard. But more importantly, to the question at hand, Legendary and I were talking about this yesterday. There's so many novel ways to take advantage of the quality assets that we have, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum. And, without creating a taxable event, you can do sorts of things where you can loan, take collateral out, and you never have to sell. And then you can spend those stables, pay off your loans. I mean, look at what you guys are doing with the NFTs, right? And how you can gain collateral or use them for collateral rather, and take a loan against them and spend those stables instead. So I think as this market continues to mature, you're going to see people who are less likely to sell some of these blue chip assets that are going to be around for the next decade or more. and then just use that money to leverage it in other ways without creating taxable events for themselves. Like we're big Bitcoin holders, but we thought we were going to sell some, but now we're starting to think maybe we won't sell any Bitcoin ever because it's just going to continue to trend up over time, and we can use it as an asset for get collateral to tap into other liquidity.
That is certainly a smart way to think about it, like using the assets to tap into other liquidity. Definitely need to research all of that stuff more if you are thinking about doing that at any point in time. The other interesting thing, which is worth noting, because I think we're getting to that point in the market where things have moved up enough, is Legendary's point that he mentioned what Loopify had been saying publicly, is that I will be selling ETH at $3,000. I will be doing it. That's my target. Doesn't matter if it's going to go up. And yet yesterday, I think he publicly said, well, maybe I'm going to change my mind. I don't know if I need to sell it just yet. So there's definitely a danger in the way that we think about these things and how we just get increasingly bullish as the price goes up and forget to sell even the allocation that you feel like you have to, because that like you need that for some particular reason. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. Legendary, any reflections on that before we get into the headlines?
Yeah, absolutely. Like coming from a TradFi background, if you have your typical stock portfolio, whether it's allocated in an S&P 500 or in an MSCI World, you have like that 4% rule, which basically says, stock market returns on average 7% per year. Look at an average inflation of 3%, so you can take out 4% per year of that portfolio without ever diminishing the capital that you put in. So this is the return that you can take out and live from without having to actually take out the capital that you put in, that principle, if you want to call it like that. And with that BTC trending up thought that Funky just shared, the question is, what is the equivalent of that in crypto, especially that you are not only you don't only have to rely on the price trending up, you can also put that to work depending on your risk preference, whether that's staking or liquidity provision across different pools. So is there a model that fits your risk preference where you actually don't have to DCA out, but you can stake, put the capital to work, and can basically also handle 70-80% volatility, which we might see. Again, I also don't think that we will see that volatility that we've seen over the last years now with the ETFs. But I think it would be interesting, and this is a very individual thing, to figure out a model like that where you don't have to DCA out, but just keep your assets and see how you can live by the returns that you're generating.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. Just to follow up on my point, I said that someone in a private chat we were kind of talking yesterday about allocations, when people might sell, like what kind of future allocations we might like. And we were talking about real estate in particular. And one of the things I responded with, and again, I'm just completely on one at the moment, have been for a while. I was just like, I'm not interested in owning any real estate beyond the house that I own. And to be clear, I do have property exposure, but I don't own my own house at the moment. So like beyond that, I'm not really that interested. And the person kind of pushed back and was kind of explaining, well, you do want to have some kind of steady, reliable income. And then I screenshotted my Pudgy Penguin loans, which are earning like 0.01 ETH per day or something, which could be like as high as, well, actually a little bit more than that sometimes. And it's like, look, I know the reason why it's hard to comprehend is because it looks silly because it's a penguin. Like it looks silly because it would be hard for you to communicate to any human, normal, like intelligent person that the way that you earn money is lending against a penguin. Like I know it sounds crazy, but the lending ecosystem, this is why I've been so big on lending, so bullish on lending in general. The lending ecosystem is just not going to go away. If anything, I think the more mature it gets harder to make those type of returns because more sophisticated investors will come in. And when more volume comes in, it's going to get more competitive to get those loans. And so like the way to make that money, like it'll be harder to make that money because the rates will go down because people will respect the quality of the asset. And the more demand there is to compete for those rates, like they're just going to come down. But it's still going to be a reliable stream of income for lenders for top quality assets. So very like comical in some respect, but like Do I think NFT lending is going to be a portion of my income forever? Yeah, like I'm happy to say that. Legendary, any final reflection on that before we hit the headlines and get into the show?
I don't think it sounds that absurd for like, the general population, because general population also it doesn't sound more absurd than other things, let's put it like that, because general population also struggles to see why a Rothko artwork is selling at 8 figures, and they're like, oh, there's just a bunch of lines and colors. Why would anyone pay millions for that?
True.
Or why people are buying RM watches and they go up from, I don't know, 200K to 600K if you're picking the right RM model. So I don't think that lending against the penguin is any more stupid than that, like in the general public's perception.
True. Very good point. There's all kinds of very, very valuable things which the general public don't understand for whatever reason. Right. We've got a bunch of cool things coming up on the show. We're going to talk about the STRK airdrop and discuss the confusion with it. Are you rich? Are you not? Are you eligible? Legendary is going to crack on to that in just a little bit. We're also going to talk Bitcoin again, as these inflows are just absolutely going through the roof. And then we might touch on Jack Butcher and the ACK reveal as well. Some awesome stuff going on the NFT side. But we've got all of that to come. Let's get into the snapshot to give you the headlines, as always, from the tweet, which is pinned up top. This goes out every single day in the morning. If you do find it brings you some value, please do give it a like. Let's get into it, starting with the price action. We've got Bitcoin up a couple of percent, almost at 51K. And I believe it's gone past that since I wrote the snapshot. ETH is up 2%, over 2.7K now, which is very nice to hear. Solana at 115, Ape at 1.6. In terms of the headlines, we've got Bitcoin inflows yesterday from BlackRock alone hitting $493 million. Fubar, very prominent kind of thinker, thought leader in the space and developer, said, how are people not losing their minds over this? $500 million via BlackRock alone, all-time high in Q1 if continues, which is what I said yesterday. I think that was one of the things we were talking about yesterday. We're going to touch on it again, get into some more numbers there. Number 2, huge ETH L2 airdrop for STRK confirmed for February the 20th. Sorry. Some of the details from Olympia are that we already knew STRK users, for those being DYDX, Immutable X, we're going to get 9% of the airdrop. STRK users are also getting a portion. You can check the eligibility by going to Olympia Crypto's Twitter handle from the snapshot there. He shares the link, but do be very, very careful when you do this, because around these airdrop times, there's all kinds of fake links and you need to make sure you don't get drained in the process. And finally, Jack Butcher, ACK O'Peppen reveals at a 1.3 ETH floor. Tyler did some nice reporting around this, where there were some 2 ETH sales for the one of 5, 1.7 ETH sales for the one of 20, and also other sales as well. Very cool piece. In terms of the NFT price action, we've got CryptoPunks flat at 59, Bored Apes at 22.9, Mutants at 4.2, DGods at 2.9, Captains at 4.3, Apes at 6.5, Penguins up 5% at 20.2, the big mover across the board there from the major collections. Mad Lads at 162 Sol, and Nouns winning bid was at 8 ETH. Some top sales: Doodle's Cat selling for 71.4 ETH. That is $193,000. That looks pretty cool. Other side Coda selling for 72.5 as well, and a CryptoPunk selling for 71, all in the same region there, but some nice sales across a variety of collections. Legendary, those are the headlines. That is the price action. Before we get into them, any key numbers or trends that you're noticing that are catching your eye?
Without going into the BTC news yet, because this is one of the main headlines, I do like to see that sustained momentum in the Doodles collection. Again, I did miss out on picking my Grail before the floor pumped, but just seeing many more Grail sales coming through and seeing a more positive sentiment on the timeline for now, more than just a week, more than just one round of purchases is quite a nice thing. It's quite a nice thing to see. I think also that we discussed it on the show, right? We had there was a change in the Doodles team on the one hand. On the other hand, I do also think that many people have seen Pudgies and have seen the potential that an old collection can rip again, and not everything is trending downwards like the apes are doing, but there is this realistic chance of seeing a comeback. And I definitely think that there is now speculation and thinking going on in the market. What could the next comeback be after Pudgies, who is positioned to do something similar to the movement that Pudgies have done from a couple of ETH to 20 ETH?
Very interesting stuff. I have 3 things to say on that in terms of numbers and also collections, and then a question for Sammy. Number 1 is Doodles is very interesting. For the people who are interested, I'm actually speaking to Austin from Doodles later today on the Chimpreneurship Show. That's also streamed live on X and on YouTube via our normal channels, and it will be live at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. GMT. Really excited to talk to him because Doodles have been on an absolute heater doing all kinds of good stuff. So I want to dive into that with him. Second thing, before we get back to the crypto numbers, is that this is our 200th episode, Legendary, which is pretty epic. Thank you, Funky, for reminding me in the comments. And just for people who might be new, please do like, subscribe on YouTube if you haven't done already. Follow the main account if you haven't done already. 200 episodes in, pretty excited about that. Looking forward to the next 200. And final question for you, Sammy. ETH's been ripping up, you know, the last few days, but it looks like the floor prices are pretty flat there. Like CryptoPunk's flat around 59.60, Bored Ape's still 22, 23 region. Mutants seem to have been at 4.2 like every single day over and over again. DGod's just clinging to 3. If ETH goes on like a big run, do you expect this to stay the same? Do you expect these projects to decline in the face of a rising ETH price? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, typically, I think during the bear market, you'd expect the liquidity to be extracted from NFTs, because I think in a risk-on environment or a risk-on assets, you're going to have that liquidity going out to safer havens. But I think with the impending bull run or this sentiment around, okay, it's going to be an uptick in everything, I think people are comfortable just holding those assets this time around. So as we go into a bull market, I think the people that are currently here in NFTs are probably a little bit more seasoned than newbies. So they kind of understand the general cycle. They understand that after ETH runs, it's likely that you might see a run in certain NFT collections. So I think those blue chip projects will probably end up holding during this like ETH run, and then maybe even just going absolutely parabolic after. That's my thesis. I don't know whether it'll play out or not, but that's kind of like the general sentiment that I'm getting. I've got nothing to back that in terms of statistics or whatever, but that is just like the general feel of what I think might happen this time round.
Interesting. Interesting to think that maybe there are more collections now that have been around for a while, so maybe more can hold up against ETH, whereas I think the very top collections were more concentrated before. Legendary, do you go along with that thinking, or do you think we're being naive? Because this is, I mean, there's always a potential, right? There's always a potential that it holds into it. There's always a potential that certain ones decline. Like, where do you stand on it now that this is kind of a second cycle coming?
It's very, very complex, I think. I think old projects have one massive struggle, which is getting the attention of the currently relevant set of influencers and KOLs and tastemakers on the timeline. I do think that this is very relevant to think about, because if you solely rely on the influences of the old bull run, they just don't have, or many of them don't have, the influence that they used to have on the markets. And I know that established projects often also like to partner up with advisors that were basically from the same class, if you want to call it like that. So often they do struggle to get the attention of the current timeline. We see that with some of the games. We see that with some of the bigger projects. Don't want to call out names specifically, but I think that is one thing to keep in mind. Just from a cycles perspective, as Sammy has described it, after the ETH run, that we're going to see inflows into NFTs. I definitely agree with that. I think it's not going to be easy to tell which projects will profit from that, because an additional factor is, and that's kind of the counter argument to the point that I just made previously, that now you have an existing holder structure, you have thinner floors, you have that concept of, relative lows, relative highs. Like, hey, the price has been up there. All it takes is 300 sales to pump it to 30 ETH or whatever the collection floor looks like. And with NFT lendings, your assets can also now be more productive because you can just say, I'm going to throw, 80 ETH into Pudgies, take 4 loans against the 4 Pudgies that I bought, and then have, I don't know, 55 ETH available again to do whatever I want with it. So there's multiple factors, but in general, I do agree with the cycle structure that Sammy suggested, and I do think it will play out like that, but I don't think it's as trivial to forecast which collections will benefit from that and which won't.
Okay. Interesting stuff. Attention is always a part of the game for sure. So I guess maybe you need it on steroids when the market is also on steroids, because people are going to get antsy with they're going to get a little bit trigger happy, I think, when they can see ETH moving up. You have to really convince them even harder than you have to normally convince them. I mean, you have to convince people first to part with their ETH to buy the asset. But when ETH is going to move up in this aggressive way, then I guess you need to be doubly convincing them at that period of time over and over again on a routine basis, because you have to feel like people will get a little bit trigger happy at that period of time, almost looking for a reason to sell, if anything. Jack, your hand is raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. What are your thoughts on this conversation about whether or not the rising ETH price is going to affect NFTs in this second NFT cycle?
Yeah, I'm honestly struggling so much with this at the moment with my own bags. I think one thing that's really clear for me is it's nice to have both. Like, it's nice to have ETH in this market rather than just your ETH portfolio being entirely in NFTs. I did a bit of consolidating early on, and that definitely makes me feel a little bit more comfortable in my bag. So I do think there's that, there's that sense of, look, if you're really really struggling right now, if you're feeling like your gut is sinking when ETH's ripping, then maybe you should just just double check your bags and make sure you've got a bit more of an even distribution or some distribution in ETH so you can sleep at night. But the risk takers are the ones who do really well in these markets, so who am I to talk? I think for me, if we're going to talk about NFT specifically and how I'm looking at which ones are going to potentially rip if the market does rip, which is where I do believe it's going to be, I think it's going to be a real 50-50 split. And I think what I'm looking for at this moment in time is still projects who have history of delivering in the bear market because of this airdrop season that we have. And I think the reason behind that is obviously, within your snippet today, B-Check, you've talked about how Pudgies are going to get like a favourite airdrop. We've seen D-Gods with their airdrops recently. It does seem to be those projects with the reputation and also the name that they aren't going anywhere and they're not going to rug. And I think we've seen, even as of yesterday, you have this Teddy's CEO who stepped down from the Soul project. And it's just proof that, look, a bull market is coming, and traditionally all the biggest gains are picking up like minted projects, like early projects. But I still think you've got to be really careful there. And I do actually think that these previous blue chips, if they've been building, they do have real opportunity to gain momentum because of this airdrop season that we just haven't seen previously. And final thoughts from me is that Doodles and Cool Cats are really good examples of this right now, where they've just been on an absolute tear recently. And I do believe it is that, like, people are trying to see, okay, if ETH is going to run, if NFTs are going to run, where am I comfortable with my bags being, where it's not just going to be a complete rug, or it's not going to be a project that goes silent as soon as there's a bit of turmoil in the market.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a very strong thesis for those quality IPs where even if things didn't go perfectly the first time round, they've continued to build really cool stuff, kept their heads down, kept building, and the love for the IP, coupled with the fact that the things that they've been building are actually coming to fruition now, that like gives people something nice to look forward to. So I think there is some merit in that idea. Interesting point from a personal perspective. And then I'm going to go to Sammy in a second, who wants to build on the NFT point. And then we're going to get into the STRK token stuff in just a moment. So stay tuned for that. But an interesting thing I've heard people talk about is this idea that when you have ETH and you have NFTs, then you can like kind of count your NFTs as part of your ETH portfolio. Just as from a personal perspective, want to hear your thoughts maybe on this Legendary first. Like, I do not count NFTs as part of my ETH portfolio. Like, if I have, I don't know why you're laughing. Like, ETH is ETH. I love ETH. I love seeing ETH in MetaMask. I really think it's so damn useful. And I just, on some level, I mean, I kind of understand where people are coming from, where, you know, because you buy the NFT in ETH and you're kind of storing it there in the hope that it goes up and you can sell it for more. But I just don't, I kind of write it off / do not include it as part of my ETH portfolio, because if part of my ETH portfolio, I need to know that I can do things with the ETH, and I can't do things with the ETH when it's stuck in an NFT, because there are actually only, and this is a good point about lending. Yes, people talk about being able to unlock capital, but at the same time, you can only do that in very few collections. Like, very, very few collections are quality or deemed quality enough for you to be able to unlock 70% of its value via a loan. Very few collections. So do you have a thought on that, Legendary? What's your thought? Am I crazy for not thinking that way?
Look, I think about it the other way around, but I'm also biased because I certainly have a bigger NFT exposure in my total portfolio allocation than most people who are sane and in Web3. I used to be like at 85-ish%. Now I'm at 55%. So basically, if I wouldn't count my JPEGs, I would just be half as rich or half as pre-rich as I currently am. So I definitely have to count them. The way I do it, though, is I only look at things with my portfolio tracking tools that have currently active bids on Blur. So they're like pseudo liquid in a sense. If I find a better opportunity, I can instantly dump into Blur bids and then, you know, put the money to better use in absence of obviously the majority of the NFTs that I hold that I can't borrow against, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, it sounds more like that it's out of necessity that you need to count it in as part of the portfolio rather than it necessarily being optimal. Is that fair?
No, I would say it's a deliberate choice. Like, my portfolio allocation is a deliberate choice, so it wouldn't make sense to have half my money in JPEGs and then not count them as part of like my overall ETH portfolio.
Fair enough. I guess it's just different perspectives, different outlooks. Good to hear both sides there. Sammy, you wanted to make a final point before we get into the STRKnet airdrop details on having and holding NFTs and storing ETH in NFTs.
I think the point around, like, do you record them? Like, do you write them down? I probably write them down as soon as I buy them, just because they're so volatile. I think it's probably the accountant in me going back to how you treat them. Like Legendary says, you'd measure the bid, because that's traditionally how you record them in a set of financial statements or something. So, and typically that is lower than the floor price. So ultimately, I just kind of write them off, forget about them. I think the point around, like, which ones do you select? I mean, the ones that I'm holding would be stuff that I get actual utility out of now. And I think you do get some liquidity from that. We talked about lending, so specific collections. But I think on the flip side, Jack touched on the airdrop side of things. Like, I hold Ghostly Ghosts and some of the other ones that you could potentially get, like Pandra's. You could potentially get some sort of tokens out of that. Mockaverse, like, they've obviously made an announcement about that token, so they've got a constructive obligation. Like, all this kind of stuff where you know there's going to be liquidity coming. I'm happy to hold those. But if it's just like a collection that is just an NFT that has a really volatile floor price, it becomes a little bit more risky. So
yeah, fair enough. The quality or the unique features of that particular NFT will make a difference, particularly with those which are containing fungible tokens as part of the deal. That's definitely one of the games we're playing at the moment. Okay, let's get into the first and the main headline, the title of today's show then, which is the STRKnet airdrop details. The title is correct. We've got Stark airdrop continues airdrop season. I'm going to share some of the details on screen, but Legendary, I'm going to let you set this up and explain what is going on.
Yeah, absolutely. STRKnet definitely an airdrop that has been anticipated for quite a while, that has been very, very prominent on the timeline, and that has a more complex distribution when it comes to the airdrop, because for StarkNet and using StarkNet, you can't do that with MetaMask. It's not EVM compatible. You need to use Argent or Bravos as a wallet. So it's a different ecosystem. And also 50% of that airdrop allocation goes exactly to those people who have been exploring StarkNet. That's 500K people who will receive that airdrop by having explored StarkNet. However, there is more categories to that, some of which also include ETH stakers who get a significant share. That's only 19K people who will receive that, but they get 22% of the airdrop. You have a dev-heavy focus with people who are ETH developers, who are EIP, so Ethereum Improvement Proposal authors, open source developers. I think the more relevant criterion for many people, and also the biggest chunk in terms of users, is StarkX users. That's 9% of the token allocation that goes to 600K people. And that's basically people who have been using protocols like IMX by having played games like Gods Unchained, or by having played Sorare. Everyone who has played Sorare and has been active on that for a while should be eligible for at least the minimum claim of $111. And
So
UIDX.
any transactions on IMX potentially?
Yeah, I think there's a minimum of 5 transactions that are required. Don't quote me on that, but I think this is a number that I've seen. Another interesting observation that I've also seen with the StarkNet side of things is that they chose not to reward volume. Like I did that post earlier today saying, love airdrops, meritocracy at its finest, and someone quoted and said it's the dumbest tweet, the dumbest post that this person has ever read, because it's just a volume game. And it's interesting to see with StarkNet that this is absolutely not true, because they did cap it at $100 volume. So anything in excess of $100 volume wouldn't have given you a bigger chunk of that airdrop.
Interesting. Very interesting stuff. Really great summary. Thank you for that, Legendary. And for the people who want to, get on top of it a little bit more, check their eligibility. There is a tracker. You can go to it via Olympio's tweet in handle in the snapshot. There's also this great image which we've got up on the show, which kind of outlines how much each different eligible category receives. So as you said, ETH stakers got a hell of a lot. And this is the interesting thing about proposals, and 2 key learnings for me is, one, you really can't predict every single one. Like on this occasion, you mentioned volume was just not a factor. And typically volume is a factor with these types of things. So anyone who claims they've got like a secret formula is just, it's not possible to have a secret formula. You have to do different things each time. But it does seem to reward like genuine, organic, routine use of Ethereum. Like for these L2s, it always seems to be the case. Like if you've participated on GitHub or something, if you've got a Git passport, if you've voted in some snapshots, if you're staking ETH in this case, like they just want to reward those people. And I've actually seen complaints that they were disproportionately rewarded, and the people who are doing the transactions were not rewarded enough. Do you think there's any merit to that criticism, Legendary?
I think as a protocol, you not only have to fight Sybils, but you have to kind of find strategies against airdrop farmers. And if you look at sites like Wenser.xyz that has eligibility checkers for all of the popular airdrops right now, what they still do is they assume the Arbitrum criteria and basically extrapolate that onto other protocols. So many people just use past strategies to farm future airdrops, and protocols are aware of that, so they can change up the criteria. And what they also can do is, because obviously they decide when the snapshot is, they have all of the transaction on-chain data, so they can have a look and feel like, okay, what makes sense? What is the average user doing? What is currently being farmed? Look at something like Layer 0, where you have tools like Merkley that allow you to farm so many smart contracts in a couple of clicks. So it's easier for protocols to like figure out, okay, what do they assume to be like just farming activity, and what have many people done, and how to basically react to that. So I do think that there's some points that, like, not always, but like often stand out. Something like we've also seen with StarkNet is that repeat activity. The criterion there was to be active for 3 months or more. and also have a bit of a wallet balance that was super low at 0.0005 ETH, but just that sustained activity. But having like volume goals or contract interaction goals is working out often, but not always. So it's definitely not possible to predict the criteria for future airdrops. Yeah.
Very good. Very interesting discussion there. Sammy, I think you've got a final point to make, and then we'll wrap it up and move on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think if future protocols start to reward just natural organic activity, then you're going to have these older wallets that are going to become very valuable. You're going to have future inflows of airdrops that just by having that older activity, it could potentially become extremely lucrative.
For sure.
So it's interesting.
100%. 2 points on that. I mean, you have been advising Frame, the L2, which is coming out soon, and that did exactly that, right? You wanted to have access to your wallet, which was, I believe, from trading in, was it 2021 or 2022? I can't really remember. But the point is, it's 2024 now. And it was rewarding historical activity from your NFT trading, I believe. So you definitely want to keep access to those wallets, so much so that I actually need to go back to an old wallet, which I've lost access to at the moment, but I need to just get into it so that I can check the STRKnet stuff. Because I remember doing stuff in 2022, potentially. I can't remember the year, and I've since like completely migrated over to a new set of like cluster of wallets that I do my stuff on because I changed computer. And so, yeah, you got to bear that in mind. A lot of that historical activity, well, not just the historical activity. Think about this from the future's perspective. The activity that you're doing right now will also be valuable in 2 years' time because the stuff that you did 2 years ago, 1 year ago, was valuable as well. So you've just got to keep that in mind, and try to build up some on-chain history for well, just as you go about your business. Very interesting stuff. Don't need to do anything more on that. The point is, yes, there are more airdrops. Yes, there are going to be more even after this. So just stay tuned. We'll make sure we're on top of all of them and keep you up to speed with what is going on there. Let's get into the next headline, which is to do with which direction shall we go? Let's go with the Bitcoin inflows. Legendary, maybe you can change the title of the space at the same time. And I'll set it up. So we have a couple of points of data, which I thought was very interesting. I've got them both up on screen for the people watching live, but I'll read it through for the people who are not. Farside Investors was quote tweeted by Fubar, and he said yesterday, Bitcoin ETF daily flows from BlackRock alone was at 493 million, which is pretty high. And then DFarmer had a second tweet, which was simply, it's just a numbers game, people. No need to overcomplicate stuff. It's kind of what we were talking about yesterday. Like, do you believe there will be more inflows than there will not be moving forward? That's like one of the simple questions. And he had quote tweeted a separate tweet, which showed that Tuesday was the largest daily net inflow to spot Bitcoin ETFs thus far, plus 631 million. So this is obviously a very high number. It seems to keep increasing. There seems to be ferocious demand at the start of this week. Legendary, any thoughts on this relentless inflow at the moment?
It's, the best advertising for the ETF is BTC price going up. And if BTC price keeps going up, people getting more and more greedy, and we'll probably see inflows also going up in line with that. It is definitely a self-accelerating mechanism that we are seeing in the markets right now.
Indeed. I mean, we spoke about it a lot yesterday. I don't know if we want to talk about much more, but I guess the point made by Fubar here, who's known to like kind of joke around on the timeline sometimes. I don't think this is necessarily a joke, but we were talking about all-time highs yesterday when we could get there. I think I was more bullish than you two yesterday. Fubar seems to be suggesting all-time high in Q1 if it continues at this rate. Sammy, what are your thoughts? You sticking with your bearish sentiment from yesterday that we will not see all-time highs sooner rather than later, or are you going to flip flip like a switch in 24 hours?
I think I was bullish, but
not bullish enough.
Not bullish enough. Yeah, I think analysts revised their forecast to 112k this year. I'd probably tend to agree with that. I think you could see, I don't know, the Bitcoin halvening. You probably have like that narrative going. You have all these TradFi guys coming in. I mean, it is simply a numbers game. I think if you've got that much money flowing into Bitcoin or into the ETFs and subsequently required to hold the Bitcoin in spot, it's pretty bullish.
Fair enough. I think that is the general sentiment for sure right now. We'll have to see where we go and whether this kind of ferocious demand just continues in the exact same way. I want to do something slightly different in a moment. We're going to skip the final headline, although we might touch on it just for a second. And we want to talk a little bit about where our attention is. We said we were going to do this yesterday, talk a little bit about, with there being so much going on in different places, getting pulled around from 1L2, today at STRKnet. We just mentioned Frame as well. We talked yesterday about Blast coming, Celestia, the Cosmos ecosystem, all kinds of stuff going on. Just take a few minutes for each of us to kind of talk through where our attention is, trying to focus the discussion a little bit in the last 10 minutes. But just before we do that, I will bring you the Web3 roundup from the snapshot pinned up top, as always, to get you up to speed quickly with what else has been happening in the space in the last 24 hours. So, as Jack mentioned earlier, Pudgy Penguins and Lil Pudgies will receive the SWIO token airdrop from Second World Games. Another example of those penguins getting some juicy rewards from other protocols. Next, Wasabi announces ERC 404 marketplace where traders can buy Pandora NFTs. Tyler gave some further context there. They've effectively added an ERC 404 marketplace. Traders can buy Pandora NFTs, for instance, directly from the Uniswap pool, unlocking NFTs not on Blur or OpenSea. Interesting stuff there. The 404 stuff is interesting. If you want to check it out, you can read more from one of the previous snapshots, actually, where there was a good article to it. Next, we mentioned this as well. Teddy CEO steps down 1 week after mint. Claynosaur's co-founder had these thoughts on it. Said the bar is so low. We minted for similar amounts in the bear market. We hustled, broke our backs, and clawed our way out of the mud to make sure the product we loved would see the light. Turbo bullish on Claynosaur's. But yeah, maybe it's a little bit too easy to get this capital at the moment, and people tapping out before they even have to do anything. Pretty outrageous. Next point, Rune Guardians airdrop to some Bitcoin ordinals holders, and they ran up to a 0.025 Bitcoin floor. That's pretty fun for the people who received them. I did not. Getting into the final three pieces of news, Jack Butcher releases ordinal checks. Also, floor prices at 0.4 BTC. No sales yet, though. And no more BTC checks will be distributed into 2025. These were distributed to single check holders. Jack Butcher continuously thinking of interesting ways to reward his holders already. Next, G-Money's $1 million punk loan gets refinanced on Gondi from 14% APR to 13.29% APR. That's pretty fun, showcasing Gondi's refinancing feature, which is very cool. Kind of cool that someone just saw this $1 million loan and thought, actually, I'm going to put $1 million on chain now and get involved in this particular loan. Very cool that that's even possible. And final point, Farcana announces Community Happiness Center to remedy incorrect airdrop allocations. And Grail.eth, prominent collector and thought leader in the space, said Community Happiness Center is where those who are airdrop tokens are taken to be tortured. I think they had some issues with the airdrop allocation and now trying to figure out a nice way to get people get the allocations that they need, but maybe not so well received up to now. Legendary, that is the Web3 roundup from everything else in the space. Any quick reflection on anything in there before we move towards like a broader discussion on where our attention is moving at the moment?
When I saw the Community Happiness Center post by Farcana, I was like, is this a troll? Am I falling for a wrong Farcana account? They can't be serious about that.
It sounds very dystopian, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like something from, what's the name of it sounds like something from A Brave New World by Huxley. It's like, okay, you NFT holders, Just go to the Community Happiness Center and you won't worry about floor price anymore. Just walk into the community center and we'll give you the dose that you need and you will be happy.
Does insurance cover the dose?
Take your Soma.
Yeah, possibly.
Soma for everybody.
If we ever do a second show and go deep dive into airdrops and opportunities, we would call it like the Community Happiness Show.
Yeah, why not? Good. There's some good meme potential here, which I hope people are thinking about. But yeah, hopefully they figure that out, because similar to you, Legendary, my reaction was, what what is that? Very, very strange. Jack, quick question point before we get into a deeper discussion on where our attention is looking at the moment, trying to make sense of the crazy opportunity at the moment. Jack.
No, I'm happy to wait until we get into that discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Okay, Legendary. We were talking yesterday a little bit about all the stuff that's going on. It feels on a personal level, but also something that we felt in conversation with various people, that it's too hard to keep up with everything going on at the moment. If you had to synthesize where your attention is looking in the next for the next few months, maybe even the next few weeks, I don't know what time frame you want to apply to it, but relatively short to medium term, in just a minute or two, like, what are the top 3 things or areas or narratives that you are finding interesting at the moment?
It's a very good question. So the things that I'm currently looking at, on the one hand, definitely I have a big focus on farming airdrops on Solana. I think we haven't seen a lot of airdrops on Solana yet. We have seen some very promising ones. There's some very popular things to do, whether that's Camino, whether that's Tenso, whether that's Parcel. And that's definitely where a lot of my attention is on the one hand.
Okay.
On the ETH side of things, if you want to put it like that, I would say I definitely have a lot of exposure when it comes to Web3 gaming. Still think that there are some smart plays to be made there. I think Web3 gaming, if you want to trade actively, is a market that you can observe, watch patterns, watch announcements, watch news, and try to get an edge there. So that's the second point for me. My improvement area, if you want to put it like that, my learning area, where I do dedicate a lot of time now, and I was also very thankful for the helping hand that Funky has offered, is to explore Cosmos more and just to familiarize myself with what's going on there in that ecosystem. How can I participate? How can I put my funds to work there? Because it's just, as an ETH user, look at how long it took ETH users to go over to Solana. Almost nobody did in the last cycle, right? When I checked something like Portal Bridge, I used it the first time 774 days ago, and that was in the last cycle. And then I kept using it, and you just build that historical volume. And like many people now just onboard to Solana from ETH, I know Cosmos has its own set of native users, but I also know that ETH users have a lot of pull and have a very loud voice. So I was like, nah, do I want to set up another set of wallets, Kepler, or whatever else there is out there? I'm like, nah, if there's a friction, where there's a friction, there's an opportunity to be made, because many people will be too lazy to do that. So I want to get a bit of an edge, knowing that I'm late to Cosmos, but want to get a bit of an edge there as well. Apart from that,
that's your 3, man.
Just 3? Wonderful.
Yeah, go on. I'm sure people want to know your 4th as well, but then we'll stop.
I'm gonna keep it a secret.
Okay, as you said, right? There's so many. We had to pick a top 3. So yours are Web3 gaming on ETH, Solana, protocols, and third was, tell me. Cosmos, yes, of course. So for people who are unclear, like Atom, Celestia, all the kinds of stuff that are going on there. Okay, those are your 3. Sammy, what are your 3?
So RWA, I love the Legendary mentioned around Parcel, indexes, real estate on Solana. That's quite interesting. I'll also be looking for protocols that perhaps lending real world assets, so similar to Arcade and a few others, and see if I can get into maybe pre-sale rounds, but like probably a focus on that rather than actually farming the protocol.
Interesting
I think my
point. Very
second
good point.
one will probably be omni-chain. So like your polyhedra, your hyperlane, layer 0, that kind of stuff. I think the future is going to be interoperable. So you're going to have multiple blockchains. So I think those bridges between them will become very, very, very valuable. My third one will probably be, so it's kind of gaming, but probably just because I've seen that IMX stuff around the STRK airdrop, I think I'll be looking for games that use different chains that I wouldn't otherwise use. So I know Pudgy Penguin, that game uses ZK Sync. So looking at those games and maybe playing those games just because you get like a double dip on airdrop.
Okay, interesting stuff. So for you, kind of gaming, RWAs, and
omni-chain, so like interoperable.
Omni-chain.
Yeah.
With parenthesis there, a key point that you made, like attached to that, is that these pre-sale rounds / seed rounds / KOL rounds at the moment has to be a focus for people if you're in this game with an audience. Like if you're not even looking at those at the moment, you're just not participating and missing a huge opportunity. So whilst we're talking about like market stuff as like where our attention is going, I would also say kind of / that a huge amount of my attention is going in that direction too. Because if you like the protocol, why not invest in it at the same time if they're going to have a token in 3 months time? Like, so those two things are kind of go hand in hand, but also adds a kind of layer on top of your workload, because you need to evaluate that aspect of the investment rather than just sticking your capital in there. My three, let's do my three. Number one is Blast. I can't believe we had this conversation yesterday and no one said Blast. Unfortunately, sorry guys in the audience, like there's no crossover here. There's just like going to end up being 9 things that we think are important. But I would say number one is Blast for me. I think that Pac-Man is a genius in terms of incentives and designing like he built Blur in such a fantastic way. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it's kind of irrelevant. He attracted all the capital there. He's going to do the same thing with Blast. If you think that you're going to take your capital off Blast because the incentives aren't going to be there, I think that's a very naive position to have. There will be a reason to keep it there when that ETH unlocks. And then there's just going to be an absolute explosion of apps that get built on top of it, which means that we're going to have to use all of them in order to try to participate in this Blast season. So that's one of my big theses. I think Cosimo de Medici yesterday wrote one of the most bullish tweets I've ever seen from him in particular on the whole ecosystem. Not that I think that's actually relevant in the sense that I don't think people would, I kind of put other people's opinions aside. I've been bullish on Blast since the beginning. I deposited a reasonable amount when I did. And we were talking about this yesterday on the show before that tweet, but to the extent that people find that type of stuff relevant, like that kind of gave confirmation to the thesis. 2 more things similar to Legendary, actually. Celestia, I really want to hone in on and figure out like what exactly is going on there in the Cosmos ecosystem. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is like a / 3/4 NFT lending. I want exposure. Like I've invested in lending protocols on ETH, lending protocol on Solana. I want to figure out a way to get exposure on Bitcoin. I think like wherever there are valuable assets, there will be lending. It's just like one of the natural extensions of how like the economy develops, the financialization of any valuable assets. So I think it's just a really natural thing to want to get exposure to. And I'll do that by participating as a lender, but also trying to invest at the same time. So to your point, Sammy, about trying to participate in these rounds, I think that's really, really important as part of the strategy. Any reflections on what we've said to each other? Legendary first.
Yeah, I think if you look at that, I think all of us have more than 3 things, right, that we didn't touch on, and we spoke about completely separate things. So it's impossible to focus on 9 to 10 things. But I think what is possible is to find an overlap to be able to double, triple, or multiple dip into things. Like you can be into gaming, lending, and Blast, and find opportunities to do all three things at once by finding that one protocol that fits your needs and having an edge there. And I do think that it's same with the gaming, right? That Sammy has mentioned via Pudgy Penguins, by using ZK Sync, and then probably also having to use an omni-chain bridge, a layer 0 solution to get your little pudgies around the chains. You do multiple things at once. So while it might sound overwhelming to focus on 10 to 12 things, I think there are just clusters that are building, and you will often end up doing more things at once. So I think there's a strategic way to approach this to not be overwhelmed by the plethora of opportunities that exist in the space right now.
For sure, that's wise words. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, guys, so I don't think we'll be able to get a chance to get around to these hands. And there's just one thing I needed to mention, because it's such a titanic thing that needs to be on people's radars if it isn't, and none of us mentioned it, but I did want to mention it, is the restaking narrative.
That was my fourth one.
Okay. Yeah, restaking with Eigenlayer is going to be insane. And there are so many protocols which you can enter Eigenlayer and kind of farm their token at the same time as getting exposure to Eigenlayer. So that's just so huge. It had to be mentioned towards the end. I hope that discussion was helpful, even if it was a short one, just kind of thinking about where our attention is flowing, why we think, and more importantly, like why we think those things are interesting and might be worth paying some attention to. Not saying that we're necessarily correct. It's just that's where our attention is going at the moment. But we'll obviously keep revising that and talking about our thinking as we go every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern time, 12 p.m. GMT. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Legendary, for co-hosting as always. Thank you, Sammy, for stepping up on camera and stage. Thank you to our speakers, Matthew, Jack, Funky, and Tiro. Thank you to everyone who has joined in the audience as well. We'll be back again with you tomorrow at the same time. Have a wonderful day. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.